Johannesburg Water says restoration of supply is expected from today, but other areas are facing a dry long weekend. Various African leaders addressed the United Nations General Assembly this year. A very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we're coming to you live from our studios here in Johannesburg. Welcome to Week in Review. Now, this is the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabala. Leading our bulletin this hour, the South African Reserve Bank has decided to keep the repo rate unchanged at 8.25%. The prime lending rate, which is the rate at which banks lend money, at 11.75%. However, Governor Lesetja Kganyago says that despite inflation being lower, there are risks to the outlook. He adds that the central bank will not hesitate to raise interest rates again if it seems inflation is getting out of control.
Unchanged interest rates will be somewhat comforting to indebted consumers as their debt repayments will not increase. Those with savings will also be getting the same interest amount on their savings. The Reserve Bank says high oil prices and the weak rand exchange rate pose the main risk to inflation going forward. Other risks emanate from the expected drier weather conditions that would likely affect agriculture production, as well as the electricity crisis, which continues to increase input costs for business. The central bank expects inflation to average 5.9% this year and only to reach the midpoint of the target range in 2025. Governor Lesetja Kganyago says the job of tackling inflation is not yet done.
As we had seen, the July reading was 4.7% and the August reading was 4.8%. And we expect that the September and October readings might be higher. And we have got to take this as it goes.
It's expected that interest rates will stay at elevated levels for longer as inflation remains a challenge. Economists say it's been a tough time for indebted consumers as they contend with the high inflation and the high interest rate environment amid the weak economy.
I think the consumer is still facing, a considerable amount of pressure due to the high cost of living. The governor spoke a little bit about real wage growth, which has been declining, and of course this weighs on the consumer's purchasing power. And I think from a survey point of view, when we survey consumer confidence, we can see that sentiment generally remains quite weak. Yes, we did see a little bit of an improvement in the last survey round, but the point really for us is that that index still remains in negative territory. And it's quite clear from the sub-indices within the survey that consumers are in no position to be purchasing big ticket items.
The high cost of living has seen consumers battling to keep up with their debt repayments. The Reserve Bank says banks have recorded an overall increase of 28% in non-performing loans by the end of July compared to the same time last year. But it says this does not pose a risk to financial stability.
For banks that have got mixed lending, where they lend to corporates and households, you might see that the number is lower, closer to, say, 5% in terms of where the NPLs sit. So for banks that do more unsecured lending, you'll see that the number is a lot higher. And this is what we do in terms of the working with the banks. From a financial stability point of view, on a quarterly basis, we track how big is the growth in non-performing loans and whether that has implications for financial stability. But we have seen self-correction on the side of the banks because this is what they have to do in terms of being risk-based in their lending. Hence, one would have seen a slowdown in credit extension as well.
The Reserve Bank has revised its economic growth forecast upwards for this year to 0.7%. That's up from an expected 0.4% growth earlier. It says structural constraints will continue to hinder economic activity and increase input costs. The central bank says an improvement in logistics and a sustained reduction in load shedding would significantly increase growth. Gloria Safakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Let me respond to the question. Let's shift our focus to this story now. More than 600 workers employed at Siriti Klipstrate Colliery in Mpumalanga are at risk of losing their jobs. The company has served the National Union of Mine Workers with a Section 189 notice of its intention to retrench.
Stella acknowledge a receipt yale memo. Sibonile ukuthi nislikeza a deadline which we need to respond within 7 days. We shall do that.
A memorandum of demands from about 100 NUM-affiliated coal miners who took to the streets to protest against the pending retrenchments. The company wants to replace permanent workers with contractors. The union has given management 7 days to withdraw retrenchment notices and negotiate.
They've given a contractor called Blue Mining a period of 25 years to mine underground. What they are doing now, they are replacing permanent employees with contractors. That on its own, we know that contractors, they've got a tendency of exploiting. When you are a contractor, the benefits obviously will not be the same as someone who's permanent. So that on its own will talk into weakening the union at large.
Siriti Klipstrate Colliery is not the first mine to have followed a similar process, a move the NUM has described as an attempt to weaken the unions.
Once faced with such, hence when they said there is a match, Siriti, I'm going there to support them. Because understanding, we've worked very hard for these people to be in these offices today.
The coal mining company supplies local and international markets, including Eskom. Balentle Mthethwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
AmaZulu King Misuzulu Kazwelithini is expected to deliver the keynote address at the annual Umkhosi weLembe celebrations at KwaDukuza on the North Coast today. The commemoration is in honor of Shaka Zulu, who is the founder of the AmaZulu nation and also preserved the Zulu tradition for generations. King Shaka was laid to rest at KwaDukuza almost 200 years ago. For more on the story, let's bring in SABC News reporter Mlondi Khadebe. Mlondi, good afternoon. Just talk to us about Umkhosi weLembe. What is the significance of this day for the Zulu nation?
Thank you very much. We are still here in KwaDukuza. You'd remember that King Shaka was buried in Stenga before it used to be Stenga. That's where King Shaka was buried. So this day is very important for the Zulu nation, especially to try and come together to celebrate this day. You'll remember that Shaka Zulu was one of the men that united the Zulu nation. All the clans that were in the province of KwaZulu-Natal were united by Shaka Zulu for that part of. But we'll just speak to the members of the Mama, especially Umkhosi in this area of Zulu. Sibonga kakhulu ngesikhathi senu. Sacela nje siphe indaba ezithamagama akagcwele.
Umntwana uNondumiso wakankomba abantu emahlabathini.
Umntwana uNondumiso masibheka kafushane ukubaleka kosuku lomkhosi weLembe ikakhulukazi kubantu abasha. Iziphi izinto abantu abadala abazitshalayo kulomkhosi?
Sitshala thina ulwazi nenhlonipho. Kakhulukazi ngoba iLembe laba umuntu omusha isikhathi esikhulu. Ngakho abantu abasha kufanele babambe iqhaza babunete phathi iLembe eyabo empeleni.
Sibuka la ukuthi abantu besifazane ngaphambili bebekade bengabekwa noma ezindaweni zokuthi baphathe noma mahole. Mhlambe kuwena ekutheni nihole ngalezi insuku zanamhlanje esizweni sakwaZulu kuchaza ukuthini?
Hayi babe kade bebekwa. Thina sathi nomkabayi nje namhlanje sathi weMkabayi kaJama wayehola uMkabayi kaJama. Baphinde wafika oNdlunkulu ulona nje wayezalisile engathi siboshiwe uNdlunkulu kaMsweni iyona owayebamba babephatha nje abantu besifazane iqhaza labo likhulu.
Mhlambe lelo suku silicelebrate kanjani ekuboniseni nezinye izizwe ukuthi kufanele zibe kanjani?
Izizwe kufanele zibe khona ngoba inkosi uShaka yayingathwasa umuntu. Bonke abantu babe bakhona bebe khona la. isikhosi ilembe labaqoqa bonke abantu zonke izizwe njengoba lalilele lingazehlula nje izizwe bese lifaka phansi kwendlunkulu nabantu nje namhlanje fanele basondele sibe nabo nje zonke izizwe ngoba zonke empeleni izizwe zingaphansi kaZulu.
Sibuka ukuthi lo mkhosi namhlanje ugujwa kade kudlule emhlabeni undunankulu wesizwe samaZulu. Ngabe kusho ukuthini lokho emakhosini?
Kubhlungu kakhulu ukuthi kwedlule undunankulu kodwa nabanye undunankulu esizwa ngabo bakhona badlula ngoba khona abanye badlula kwaba khona abanye nathi ke kulesi sikhathi esikuso undunankulu nje bedlulile nje sobuye futhi kungena omunye kodwa naye ufuna athathe icathulweni zakhe ukuthi icathulo zakhe ezinkulu asazi ukuthi ubani ozokwazi ukungena thikhaxa kodwa kumuntu nomuntu mayisefikile uyayimisela afunde uzofunda futhi ezintweni ebezenziwa kwaMathole ngoba bezizinhle zinokuhlakanipha zinobuchule zinobuqhawe wasidonsa nje isizwe kwaze kwafika la aguqa khona kodwa nje belokhu ehamba phambili eyisibani isizwe esidonsa phambili sifundeekukhulu nje nathi kuye singaxoxa kusekuseni masingaxoxa nje nalamhlanje nje siyalazi igalelo lakho ukuthi bezobehuba kwanamhlanje ngoba ubekuthanda futhi uhuba kakhulu nje makusuku nosuku. Siyabonga kakhulu ukuthi nikhona nizovezela umhlaba ukuthi umkhosi nje weLembe uyohlala khona nomini.
Sibonga kakhulu mayisikasa.
Siyabonga kakhulu.
The residents of the province of KwaZulu-Natal are gathering here in KwaDukuza to try and remember Umkhosi uShaka with his basically way of showing the Zulu nation that he united the Zulu nation in the period when there was also that part of the apartheid system in South Africa. But he's made sure that they unite the Zulu nation for this generation. But they're also telling us that they're also planting the seed to the residents of the province of KwaZulu-Natal, especially the young ones, that the Zulu nation is one of the nation that needs to be basically protected all the time. Back to you in studio.
Thank you very much, Londi. That was SABC News reporter Londi Khadebe reporting from the annual Umkhosi weLembe celebrations out in KwaDukuza in KZN. Let's shift our focus to this story now. The United Democratic Movement, also known as the UDM, is marking its 26th anniversary in Mthatha in the Eastern Cape today. UDM leader General Bantu Olumisa, who formed the first ANC breakaway party in post-1994 era, is reflecting on 26 years of the movement. Let's take you there live and listen in.
The main contenders are joblessness, crime, lawlessness and violence, economy, load shedding, water, poverty, incompetence and corruption, as well as the influx of people from all over seeking refuge and resources from the state. Because of incompetence, the elderly are left confused by contradicting explanations as to why their pensions are late, being paid only a portion of it, and inability to access it altogether. We just spent 1 billion rand on the tip of one of these icebergs, corruption. Yet the Zondo Commission's work seems to be for nothing, as its report is gathering dust in Parliament. We are not surprised that this is happening because the ruling party has directly been named in this report. One thing is certain: those fingered by the Zondo Commission cannot be charged to fix the problems of this country. Scandals like Bosasa, Chancellor House, and the Guptas have come to light. Let us not fool ourselves. The ruling party helped themselves to the kitty to sustain itself. Everyone should know by now, one-party dominance breeds corruption, and that the people of South Africa who have been affected by it are tired. There is only one solution: the 2024 national and provincial elections are the ideal opportunity to get rid of the real state capture, rather state capturers. A new dispensation would appoint people based on skills, qualifications, and merit is needed. As we speak, because of employment discrimination, we see medical doctors protesting in the streets that they are not employed, yet our hospitals are short-staffed. Other experts and professionals are being snatched up from our shores, and the brain drain is a daily occurrence. Lawlessness and crime continued unabated. What does it say about a government that cannot protect its citizens? The current government has failed to invest in people when it comes to economic growth. Areas such as manufacturing, agriculture, and other areas have not been developed. People who had owned the economy before 1994 had delisted their enterprises and or moved their head offices to other parts of the world. Properties are being bought by outsiders. Looks like South Africans who fought for liberation, thinking that there would be something for them, were sold an empty shell. Sithi ke kwaba bantu babangele into yoba imali yeli lizwe ityiwe belawula kodwa benikwe imandate yolungiselela thina nani. Xa ngaba kwi-30 years bephethe bengasebenzi, kunyaka ozayo kwi-elections masibakhombe egeyithini kuba kaloku bamfelishile. A new dispensation which would appoint people based on skill, qualification, and merit is needed. As we speak, because of employment discrimination, I want to repeat this, we see medical doctors protesting in the streets that they are not employed, yet our hospitals are short-staffed. Apha ke ithetha ukuthi aba bantu kwakuthiwa masilwela inkululeko, kanti bayayazi uba le mali baza kuyitya, bazawunikeza amashishini kubantu abasuka ngaphandle abafana noPakistan nakwezinye indawo, kukhutshwe oosomashishini ebeberana ii-businesses apha. Ngapha xa ufundise umntana wakho efuna ukuqala ishishini akakwazi uba makayiphi afumane imali aqala ishishini. Sithi abo bantu abafamba ke ngoku sibakhuphe sibajongise kwenye indawo ngaphandle apha eburhulumenteni. Even in the townships where the Maponyas, Binkonyenis here in Umtata, Mutswenyanes, and many others thrived at a time, have been taken over by Pakistanis and other nationals. This is a neo-colonialism of a special kind. And there are rumors that these people are not even paying taxes. In addition, no wealth is generated locally because the people spend their government grants on inferior quality goods at these outside vendors. The UDM has been calling for an economic indaba which would allow the country to, for the first time, be in a position to come up with an economic policy that would make clear-cut changes to empower the majority of its citizens. It becomes worse when people are landless. Education policies have been chopped and changed over the years, so much so that South Africa is producing unemployable graduates or those who cannot start their own business or create jobs. This in turn creates a frustrated youth who turn to drugs and crime. What the voters need to do is to get rid of the real estate capturers so that South Africa can have a new dispensation for 2024. Sithi ke ngesintu ngamazwi akhethekileyo nambalwa ukuze lilizwe lilunge kwawufuneka ezorhwebo ke kubizwe indaba ke kuxoxwe ngazo kuba ngoku nemfundo yethu esiyifumanayo ikhupha abantwana abangakwazi ukuqesheka abangakwazi uziqalela namashishini wabo. A new dispensation that would address the collapse of state-owned enterprises is needed. A new dispensation that will fix the criminal justice system. A new dispensation that will deal with collapsing infrastructure. A new dispensation which would engage with the SADC community to close ranks, to make sure they are targeted as a dumping, they are not targeted as a dumping zone that affect their economies and deal with crime in general. A new dispensation that will ensure that Chapter 9 institutions and the new National Prosecuting Authority have appointments made based on merit, qualification, and experience. A new dispensation with a foreign policy that fosters good international relationships with a firm view on our national interests. Sithi apha kuyawufuneka urhulumente akhutshwe lo sifake urhulumente azawujonga alwe nobugebengu sikubo. Ngaphambili apha bendike ndalawula isibeke ngenkani ke phofu bafana bakuthi niyakhumbula. Kodwa abantu bebelala evule ifestile emzini akhe ibingekho into yoba umuntu abelwe impahla yakhe okanye imfuyo yakhe ibingekho into yoba uhambe kungenwe nje esirhoxweni kudutyulwe kwamuntu okhoyo okanye abantu bezonwabele. Sithi ke akukho rhulumente apha once ilizwe libe njalo ufuneka simkhombe phi egeyithini simkhomba phi ahamba amasela makahambe. Make sibuye ke ngoku sizawuthetha ngoba iUDM yenzeni oko yaqala ukwenzela uba xa nihamba phaa esitratweni nizokwazi nani ukubooster. Ladies and gentlemen, the UDM can celebrate the fact that for 26 years it has been consistent in its stance of betting on the wicket of the ethics of good governance. We started banging the drum of anti-corruption back in the day when we were vilified and called with all sorts of labels and names. The UDM has been vindicated over the years, and we had several great successes along the way. For example, the UDM was instrumental in agitating for the abolishment of the immoral floor crossing legislation, which is no longer on our statute books. We succeeded in having the Independent Electoral Commission's former chief electoral officer resign because of an irregular lease agreement she had arranged. We were part of the legal team or legal action taken to preserve and protect the former public protector Thuli Madonsela's report on state capture. The UDM exposed corruption at the Public Investment Corporation, PIC, amounting to billions of rands. This directly led to the establishment of the Mpati Commission of Inquiry, which has vindicated us. One thing is certain, that the pensions of the government employee is under severe threat because the PIC was seemingly established as a mere piggy bank for some. Both unlisted and listed companies are not servicing their loans. Since the time of now defunct DASA, as early as 1999, we saw that some parties were using state resources to line party coffers, and the UDM has campaigned for transparent and equitable party funding. Bantu bakuthi umuntu uzawubuza ba nenze ntoni ne-UDM okona bakho. Ibi-UDM ethe abantu abatya imali zorhulumente zerhafu zabantu mababanjwe. Ibe-UDM ethe yenza le mizekelo ilandelayo. Apho siye sakhupha u-ICCO ngomosha. Bekwa ile UDM eyaveza ububhilibidi kwi-PIC kulama ndawo ye-pensions. Ibe UDM echiloyo into yoba le mali ngathi leyiswe kwa PIC isetyenziselwa ukuthi mayinikeze ama-comrades athile enza ibhizinesi bekuyibhanki njengoba wena kuthiwa yiya ebhankini e-commercial. A new dispensation leke siyifunayo yile ithi ayikhona makuliwe nobugebengu bukhoyo. Urhulumente ke oza kwenza lonto omtsha not lana masela asikhokheleyo. Isabalisa intsomi ye-UDM basenzeni. We were part of the drive that led to the establishment of the Zondo Commission, which has vindicated the UDM in our position that the ruling party has had its hands in the cookie jar for years. The UDM has led the initiative of opposition parties working together to show a united front on various issues, including shedding a light on the ruling party's looting spree. We have managed to apply some brakes. The UDM has been advocating for changes to the Electoral Act for many years, and a step in that direction was recently forced by the Constitutional Court, which changes the Act to allow the independent candidates to stand in national and provincial elections. But it has not gone far enough. If we are serious about improving accountability, we must have an electoral system that introduces a mixed proportional and constituency-based system that also allow people to elect their own president directly. In 2021, South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, Mr. Zwelinzima Favis and I successfully brokered a peace accord between the Codeta and Qatar when the conflict saw many deaths and injuries. The UDM Deputy President Ngabayomzi Kwankwa's African Parliamentary Association for Human Rights have been doing sterling work across the globe. South African Defence Force and SABC military veterans brought to our attention that the Minister of Defence was attempting to cause division among the veterans by publishing regulations seeking to regulate their pension benefits in a contentious manner. After I had raised this matter in this year's SONA debate, President Ramaphosa had instructed that the matter be handled by his deputy president. I am happy to report that the minister had in the meantime, through the pressure exerted by the UDM, withdrawn the contentious regulation and that all military veterans will now be treated equally. We have moved along nicely with the group of resigned Eastern Cape teachers who are seeking re-employment, who had approached the UDM for assistance. I'm happy to report that a teachers representative committee had met with the Eastern Cape MEC for Education, Fundile Gade, and his officials. We are still waiting for the outcome of the agreements that were entered into. After we took up the SABC government pensioners' complaints with President Ramaphosa at the SONA debate in February 2023, he had referred the matter to Minister of Finance Enoch Godongwana. What happened in these cases is that people who had started their employment with the SABC countries in the 70s and 80s had their pensions referred to the GEPF, that is Government Employees Pension Fund, from asset management companies like Alexandra Forbes, Sanlam, etc., in terms of the Act of 1996. What shocks some retirees is that once they take retirement, their pensions are calculated since 1996 instead of their original employment date. Some progress had been made in that a pensions representatives committee was formed and their report submitted to Minister Godongwana. We are, however, at an impasse almost 7 months into the process, where the minister seems to be unable to carry out the president's instructions. In what world does a minister ignore the instruction of his or her president? In general, people are contemplating that heads of departments are complaining that heads of departments and ministers are ignoring their letters. Service providers are not paid on time, all signs of a dysfunctional civil service. We have, however, continued to engage with pensioners to hear their side of the story, and we have since engaged the services of a legal team to take the matter to court. We did this especially after we reported the minister's intransigence to the president. One gets the impression that the president was just doing a PR exercise during the SONA response to the pensioners' concerns. The UDM and 17 other concerned South African parties and individuals have joined hands to take Eskom, NESA and government to court to establish exactly what reasons are behind load shedding. We struck gold when North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria ruled that all hospitals, clinics, schools, and police stations should be spared from electricity disruptions. The UDM had exposed serious allegations, alleged wastage of money at National Student Aid Scheme, that is NSFAS. This while students are not getting paid in time and others denied the opportunity to access much needed funds. NSFAS recently, as you know, moved from a building where they were paying 500,000 to a building where they pay 2 million rands per month. The UDM has led the process of talks between opposition parties. We will stick to the agenda of closing opposition ranks where we have a common position. We have taken up the cause of sub-headmen who form an integral link between the people who live in rural villages and the municipal councillors, headmen and amakos. They are performing the work of councillors who are absent from the rural communities. They would like to be assisted to do their work with a monthly stipend and a cellular phone allowance. The UDM has escalated this issue to the Office of the Minister and MEC for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, as well as to the Premier. Regarding our other unceasing constituency work, we have been advocating for correctional services, employment, police reserves, and successfully made noise regarding the sitters, as well as the bevy of individuals. We do not have the luxury of having many public representatives and must use their time effectively. Mamelani, Apha ndibizwe ngabantu abahlala ezilalini zibonde ibhodi. Bathi abantu abazibhodi kwezilali generally senza imisebenzi emikhulu. Xa kufunwa ambulance kuziwa kuthi. Xa kufunwa kubulewe umuntu kuziwa kuthi. Xa kufunwa indlela kuziwa kuthi, kodwa kukho ceba ababonyuliwe. Abamkeli 20,000 rand thina bona ngenyanga. Yena engubhodi akho nesenta inikwa naleyo thenga ifone okanye athenge abhatalela itaxi ayeke ofuna ezo nto zifunwayo. Uceba wanyulwa nje uhlele edolophini. Zithi ke thina ke siyi-UDM siyithathile loo nto yabo sayisa uminister wakwakhokta nakwilida yephondo apha Eastern Cape. I'm sure if it's the same situation in Limpopo, Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal, we will present their case siqhube siye phambili. Make siyeke ngoku kwi-2024 elections. Mamele ke ngoku. Bandiyaniboma niyakuthanda ukuncokola. Thinking ahead to the national and provincial elections of next year, we must ask ourselves what the UDM has to offer the electorate. To answer this question, we say the following. The UDM is not shackled by the baggage of the past and have our feet firmly in the new democracy and the political freedom of all South Africans. We indeed have the potential to give action to our vision of being the political home for all South Africans. Namhlanje apho uyathanda uthandi. Sine bantu abasuka ngapha eKZN ngale ngakoMozambique emkhanyakude. Uzotsho eThekwini, uzotsho kwaNongoma, uzotsho eMzimkhulu, uzotsho eSouth Coast, bakhona apha. Kanithi yeye. Namhlanje sinabo abantu apha abasuka eLimpopo all the way. Bakhona. Namhlanje sinayo i-delegation okanye abantu members zethu ngebhasi besizibonile apha ababuye eFree State bakhona. I-Rustenburg ikhona eNorthwest. Babuye eNorthwest. Ikhona iMpumalanga. Ikhona iWestern Cape. Ikhona ndishile. Eastern Cape. I-Eastern Cape ikhona. The UDM has a track record advocating for clean governance and responsible leadership. We are not a resource political party, but we keep exposing those who have sustained themselves through the looting of state resources. We have remained steadfast in honoring our vision, mission, and party platforms. We have never compromised ourselves for the sake of scoring cheap political points. We are a listening party with a consultative style. We are not a party of raging rhetoric and empty promises. Although we always call a spade, the UDM speak in a positive language. Job creation, civil order, and clean governance, creating a world-class nation and hope. And finally, this party of ours is still the champion of all communities. But we need to go back to our roots, learn from our mistakes, and go into 2024 to make sure that we continue with the transformation agenda. Frustrations in South Africa are at all-time high. This nation is fed up with the lack of accountability, the overall lawlessness and uncertainty in the country. The country's insecurity, the current insecurity in the country scares off investors, both local and international. Unless these underlying issues are addressed, none of the attending matters, such as our economy, education, health, can be addressed. Most of our people live in informal settlements amongst litter and rodents, with rodents. They don't have jobs. Health and education provision is less than desirable. Level 6 load shedding has become a regular feature of our lives. The money that was supposed to properly develop Medupi and Kusile was siphoned off by the ruling party and would end up at Luthuli House via Chancellor House, their investment company. At the Zondo Commission, we heard about shenanigans at Bosasa. The corrupt largesse of elite has crept further and wider. Worse still is that the comrades in corruption do not see anything wrong with their behavior. Government services are in disarray. Infrastructure maintenance is non-existent, and its development is falling behind. So the list goes on. The ruling party shameless abuses their majority in parliament to block or bulldoze decisions and protect their own at the expense of the country and her people. They did this in the Phala saga with Section 89 inquiry, chaired by Justice Sandile Ngobo panel, and in the case of establishing an ad hoc committee to probe allegation of rampant corruption. They got rid of the public protector with the assistance of Democratic Alliance, Nogal, all a further attempt to sweep the Phala saga under the rug. South Africans can no longer trust in the so-called self-correcting nature of the ruling party. Furthermore, for their foreign and economic policies are conflicting and confusing. They are forever changing and lack discipline. That's again into masiyenze ngokubantu bakuthi. We must prepare to participate kwi-elections. Ekwenzeni kanjalo abantu kufuneka singafihlisi sithi ilizwe lethu ayisele lethu lithathiwe, and wenza ngoko mabasuswe ababantu balawula kakubi. 2024 is an opportunity, our first opportunity to affect definite change and to put a new government in place is the 2024 national and provincial elections. That's our first opportunity to affect change. One of the things that must be done is that loopholes in legislation must be closed to prevent corruption as per the recommendation of the Zondo Commission. Sitige, la Bible ka Zondo Commission, makube yiyo ezawuthi ibe isiguide xa sisiya kwi-elections, kodwa ngeke ifakwe okanye za recommendations be into eyiyo uba ngaba loo nto iyakwenziwa ngaba baphetheyo. In conclusion, I would be failing in my duty in not thanking those who sustained this party during all these years. Thank you to those who have stayed the course. In particular, I would like to thank Mrs. Thandi Nontenja, our National Treasurer, for her sterling work. She stopped short of telling me to pick up my own pockets to finance this event. Siyabulela mama ungakangifoni benexhala. Bonke aba bantu abazanga nje apha mahala sicontributile wabathatha abanye bazizele. Siyasibulela kakhulu maqabane e-UDM. Kaniziqhwabele. The UDM is proud of its investment in young leadership. We have our Secretary General in the name of Yongama Zikebe, the youngest of his peers on the South African political landscape. Uplomfano mngane kawuvela bakubona, vela ngaphambili. He is supported by two young women deputies, Miss Weber and Miss Piri. Kanvele nganiphakamisa izandla mani banibona. Ingabe ngathi into yakwaMajala hostel leni. Then we have a new national organizer, Mr. Mfihlo, who is assisted by his two deputies, Dumela and Pitso. Phakamani mengenyawo madoda. We are also encouraged by the United Democratic Student Movement, UDESMO, which is growing at various tertiary institutions across the country, and that our UDESMO graduates are rising through the ranks and are occupying councillor seats in various municipalities. Time is running up. We must work hard, focus on recruiting and spreading the UDM's gospel throughout the country. Whether there will be coalitions next year or not, the UDM should retain its character of a party that works for the people as demonstrated by the points I have highlighted earlier on. Let's take South Africa back from the state capturers, as it cannot sustain the continual looting of the hyenas. We need a new government in 2024 and reprioritize the changes this country faces to ensure that it becomes an investor's paradise. As we head home, please travel safely and let us hit the ground running as the national and provincial elections are around the corner. And remember that the first IEC registration weekend is on 18 and 19th of November. Zenihambe kakuhle, niziphathe kakuhle endleleni. Kodwa into esiyifunayo yile i-UDM ayo yabantu abathile. Ifuna ukuthi make sure uba in each and every corner, i-region ne-province, zonke ezizilapha, umuntu orhalela uba i-member of parliament, orhalela uya kwi-legislature ephondweni okanye ufuna uya ku-national, owe-UDM okanye umuntu omtsha ofikayo, makanikwe i-chance yoba azibonakale.
All right, those are live visuals from the Eastern Cape at the UDM's 26th anniversary. Leader Bantu Olumisa has delivered his address, among others there, talking about the need for a new dispensation that will employ people on merit. He's also lamented the terrible state of our township economy, saying foreign nationals have taken over the spaza shops. There's in fact no township economy to speak of, according to him. He's also reminded people of his own achievements as Prime Minister of then Transkei. He also had to include that one aspect of his ascension through a coup. As many would know, he overthrew Stella Skau. Then on the 2024 general elections, you would have heard he took us through what they have to offer as a party, saying that they have a track record of advocating for clean governance through constantly exposing looters of the state. Let's shift our focus to this story now. The issue of Middle East, or rather of the Middle East, is a critical one in relation to peace between Palestine and Israel. The two leaders, Palestinian leader Mohammed Abbas and Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, addressed the high-level United Nations General Assembly. This is what they had to say.
Allow me here to tell you that as long as we continue to suffer under the abhorrent Israeli occupation, we will continue to need financial assistance from the international community. When the occupation ends, we will thank you for your help. In addition to the crucial provision of financial support to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees, UNRWA. It is in dire need so that it could support the refugees. We are thankful to the international community for the support it has given us to build our state and our economy, and we look forward to the continuation of this support until the occupation ends. Help us get rid of the occupation, and we would be able to rely on ourselves.
The Abraham Accords heralded the dawn of a new age of peace. But I believe that we are at the cusp of an even more dramatic breakthrough, an historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Such a peace will go a long way to ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. It will encourage other Arab states to normalize their relations with Israel. It will enhance the prospects of peace with the Palestinians. It will encourage a broader reconciliation between Judaism and Islam, between Jerusalem and Mecca, between the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael. All these are tremendous blessings.
All right, let's now bring in Dr. Peter Jacobs, Research Director in the Equitable Education and Economies Research Division at the Human Research Council, for more on the United Nations General Assembly events that took place this week. Doctor, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So our leaders, among others, have taken stock of, most importantly, the Sustainable Development Goals at the General Assembly. Unfortunately, we heard the goals are not on track. They won't be met come 2030. In fact, in certain aspects, we have regressed. Firstly, just your views on the state of the SDGs.
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks for inviting us. It's the Human Sciences Research Council. I'm from the Cape Town office of the Council. I think it's very important to contextualize what is happening and unfolding, or has unfolded, at the United Nations General Assembly and the Sustainable Development Goals. There was a report that was released in the lead up to the Assembly, and this was the Global Sustainable Development Goals report, and indeed it emphasized some of those issues that you've mentioned. But we must also understand that this, for Africa specifically, this assembly is taking place just before two other big events, the BRICS Summit that South Africa hosted recently, as well as the Climate Change Summit for Africa that was hosted recently in Nairobi, Kenya. But also later down the year, in November, end of November, early December, we'll be having in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, the COP28 Summit of the United Nations. So it's against the backdrop of these events, I think, that we need to see the General Assembly and some of the highlights from the General Assembly. There were specifically three very important issues and areas, I think, that are worth commenting on. The first one is that there was a heavy emphasis in the report on what is referred to as the combating the fake science revolution. Or the fake news revolution. What this means is that the General Assembly and the United Nations more broadly is in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic was very concerned about the extent to which fake news events started driving interventions and people's responses to COVID-19. In addition to that, the goals are off track for a number of different reasons, and this brings into view the debate around what is referred to today as polycrises, or the polycrisis in the globe. And this is basically the confluence of multiple crises: ecological, cost of living, and also various political crises or crises of social conflicts and social tensions that I think you played in your earlier insert. And then lastly, I think it's the concern around evidence on the performance of the Sustainable Development Goals and whether these are on track or not on track. They were passed in 2015, adopted by the Assembly and the nations. We are halfway through that up till 2030. And actually, we have in effect arrived now at the point of, similar to what happened to the MDGs before,
Yes.
we are now discussing the post-2030 global agenda.
But I want us to tackle these barriers a bit more, because you speak of these, that perhaps another thing that we're seeing is the crises across the world. But if we had to perhaps zero in on some of the issues, we're seeing, or at least some are saying, that we're seeing a lot of funds being diverted to conflict, that in most instances these SDGs need a lot of money, they need funds, they need investment, but it seems so easy for most nations to divert funds into bolstering their military weapons, or even at times using their funds or donating their funds to conflict.
Well, this is indeed the most disappointing element in part, but there has always been this tension within the SDGs on funding, on how will the money be secured, where will the money come from, and then how the money will be distributed. Historically, the SDGs hoped that the funds will come from what we call development aid. And if we listen to by our own President Ramaphosa, there was also an emphasis on scaling up development aid.
Yes.
But you have now harped or mentioned the tension between diverting resources toward development aid versus military spending or funding wars. And this tension is really embedded in the goals itself. So what are the options for developing countries? And I think this brings us closer to a major problem that has emerged more recently as part of the poly crisis that we're referring to. It's not only a cost of living crisis, it's also a crisis of what is called growing public debt that's squeezing the developing countries. And as a result of this, you've got increasing resource transfers from developing countries to the global north and other banks or private banks that they have, these loans from. And so this is really going to create a major problem for developing countries to meet these requirements of funding the realization of any of the goals or any of their ambitions of the goals. So this means that we've got to really rethink about the model of how are we going to fund development. Investment in development, even though the Secretary General of the United Nations emphasizes the importance of scaling up investment for development, there is very little clarity on how this is going to be done and what will happen to the growing public debt burden that's pulling developing countries down.
That particular one around the debt burden, it's one now that many agree on, because even when the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, was in South Africa for the BRICS summit, he was a person that specifically spoke on there needing to be some sort of recalculation, because a number of these countries are heavily burdened, where most of their GDP is going to service the debt as opposed to dealing with other issues within those countries.
Indeed. Well, we see that in South Africa and in Africa more broadly, and it also emerged quite, on the front burner at the recent summit in Kenya on African climate change. African climate change will require a tremendous amount of what is referred to as climate change financing. Enabling countries to transition away from the carbon-intensive climate pathways to more what is some refer to as green economy financing. Where is this money going to come from? Who's going to invest in it? Who's going to invest in the so-called green technologies that got advertised? But in addition to that, there are a variety of other types of so-called climate financing models that some of them highly controversial that need to be put on the agenda. The public debt burden in South Africa, for instance, is reflecting in the rising interest rates, cost of living crises, and a huge load of the public debt is being utilized or has its sources in old pathways of energy, funding. For instance, the funding of Eskom and the traditional ways of carbon-intensive energy generation. If your public debt has got its source in that, then how are you going to transition away from it? So the transitions of where the funds will be, invested in, those are as important as the sources of funding.
Most certainly. Doctor, thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. That was Dr. Peter Jacobs. He is from the Human Research Council. And that's where we leave it for today. We see you tomorrow. Enjoy your day further.